I'm going to begin by cutting a block of XPS foam into 4 pieces. Each piece is going to be 4 inches by 4 inches to fit inside of the display case. After I've cut the pieces out, I'm going to have to make sure that they have enough clearance to fit inside of the display case. Once I know the foam is the proper size, I can start deciding on what I want my diorama to look like. I use a small N-scale locomotive to determine at what height I want the tracks. I then need to determine what type of track I want to use. I have a straight track section and a curved track section, and ultimately decided the curved track would look the best for a mountain railway. I then traced the track's outline onto the foam, followed by a loading gauge guideline, and lastly freehand drawing the cliffside edge. I then traced the terrain pattern onto another block so that I can start cutting out the terrain. Now it's time for the hot wire foam cutter. Make sure that you have good ventilation for this part. After I finish cutting out the lower parts of the cliff, I stack it onto the remaining foam, and using the first piece as a template, I cut out the remaining cliffside section. I also cut out some extra accents into the foam, clean it up, and place it onto the lower portion of the terrain to see how it looks. Now I trace the cliffside again, and using the hot wire cutter, I cut the cliff out of the lower section. It is important to leave a thin layer at the bottom of the cliff as a ground section. I now stack the foam blocks and cut out a few more details with the hot wire cutter. Now it's time to glue the foam sections together. I will start with the upper section by scoring lines into each of the pieces. Then I use a low temperature glue gun to secure the pieces together along with some pressure. I will then do the same for the lower section. The scoring is for the glue to have a little extra surface area to grab onto and keep the foam pieces together. I use just a regular rock from my parking lot to imprint a realistic rock pattern onto the foam. Just keep pressing various parts of the rock onto the foam until you're satisfied with the appearance. I do the same for the lower section, and once I'm happy with it, I can glue the upper and lower sections together. Using the same method as earlier, I score each section, apply some glue, and apply pressure. And now, plaster. I'm going to use plaster, Mod Podge, brown oxide, and yellow ochre paint to create a thick mixture that protects the foam and gives a suitable surface to paint on. Although I will prime this model, I still like using terrain colors during painting to get an idea of what it looks like. As I paint the terrain, I make sure to get into all the cracks and crevices while not spreading the plaster mixture too thick. To finish up, I use the mixture to fill gaps in between the layers of foam, and then use a heat gun to dry the plaster mixture. This will create small cracks, but that is something I want in this particular diorama. The model is then primed with flat gray primer. Next, I start building the wooden retaining wall. I stack square wood sticks in a row and line them up, and then glue 3 straight supports and 2 angled supports to keep them together. Then I have to trim the ends along the outside angled supports to create a flush appearance. Now that it looks like a retaining wall, it's time to paint it with some model wash. I use my favorite model washes and apply them until I'm satisfied with the color, and once I am, I decide where I want the retaining wall to be placed on the terrain. Next, I put tracks down onto the terrain and trim the rails alongside the edge of the diorama. While I did not show it, I cut out part of the terrain to allow the retaining wall to be a little closer to the tracks. I will use yellow ochre as a base coat. It's an excellent color that works well with the darker washes I have. After it is painted, I can apply the model washes in various colors and then just brush it into the rock. I'm going to do this several times, as should you, until you're satisfied with the results. Now, you can mix the colors as you see here, just make sure you don't blend them up too uniformly. I'm going to paint the back and top portions a flat matte black so it doesn't draw too much attention. Remember as you do the edges to make sure you go nice and slow as to not get any black paint onto the existing painted surfaces. Then I'm going to use a red powder pigment and dry brush it onto the model. After that, I'm going to spray a light layer of spray-on adhesive, let it dry for about 10 minutes, and then apply another layer of pigment just before the adhesive has fully dried. I then apply some model cement onto the tracks and apply the track onto the model. I apply some rust-colored paint to the side of the track. I did not show it, but wipe down the top of the track to give a used appearance. Next, it's time to apply ballast. I use a mixture of brown and dark brown fine ballast, and I just pour it down on the tracks and then use a brush to spread it between the ties and make sure that it's not too close to the rails. I spray a 1:100 ratio mixture of detergent and water to break surface tension, although isopropyl alcohol can be used. Then I use a 1:3 mixture of Mod Podge and water to lock the ballast in place. After the ballast is dried, I apply glue to the lower part of the terrain, sprinkle some earth-colored blended turf onto it, and shake off the excess. I finish up by applying dark brown medium ballast rocks along the cliff wall, spray the detergent mix, and lock it in place with the glue and water mix. After everything is dried, I am done. Now I have a Rocky Mountain Cliffside Railroad diorama. I can use it to display some of my favorite in-scale model train cars and locomotives.